Okay, hello chess players. In this video, we're going to talk about move orders in the four knights. So the four knights begins after e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, knight c3, knight f6, and all four knights are developed, and that's why it's called the four knights. Anyways, if you like content like this and want to see more of it, please hit that subscribe button and click on your notification icon. So why does move orders in the four knights matter? I mean, we just move our knights out, right? I mean, how is this complicated? Does it even matter what order we move them in? Well, yes, it does, especially depending on how you want to develop your pieces later. In Scholastic chess, the most common move that I see here is people will develop their bishop. They'll play bishop to c4. And actually, the most common reply that I see in Scholastic chess is, both kids will play at the speed of light, and the other kid will just immediately reply with bishop c5, and then everybody will castle and play d6 in any particular order, and then they'll develop their last piece. They'll move this bishop somewhere, either e3 or g5, and then at that point their brains will finally switch on and they'll start playing chess. But if their brain had switched on slightly before that, they would have realized that this move bishop c4 is actually a mistake. And it's something that they can immediately take advantage of using something called the fork trick. So pause the video, see if you can find it. The move is simply knight captures e4, knight e4, and then d5 takes control of the entire center. And then after bishop d3, d captures e4, bishop captures e4, bishop d6. Black has a better center than white. White does have an extra tempo to almost compensate for that, but the position should probably just be very slight edge black, and practice seems to meet that out. Like if you look at most of the games, even the high level games, like even grandmasters will attempt this with white because the computer says that maybe white's okay. Um, White still just scores very poorly, even on the GM level. I have a recent game, Mamanjarov versus Wesley So versus Mamanjarov, played in St. Louis back in 2018, where Black did end up going on to win, and it's not surprising. Black has a better center, and that's something very easy to work with, even on the GM level. So Bishop c4, if you wanted to play it, probably just instead of going into your four knights, by just moving everything like a robot. If you wanted to play bishop c4, probably you should play bishop c4 here. And that does prevent the fork trick. And if you wanted to continue kind of your normal development scheme after knight f6 attacks this pawn, you could simply defend it with your pawn. You could play pawn on d2 to d3 instead of moving your knight out, which again would prevent the fork trick. So if you depending on how you want to develop, you need to decide what order you're going to move your pieces out. That's basically the short answer here. Now, this fork trick is kind of interesting because, okay, you want to play bishop c4. Let's say you're playing this scholastic chess. Again, move orders really do matter. The two main moves here for white are something like either d4 or potentially bishop to b5. Those are the two kind of primary moves. Now, it's kind of well known that after d4 and then ed4, unless you're going to play like a Belgrade gambit, just the normal move knight to d4, bishop b4 should be fairly close to equal position. This is kind of well known to equalize. I have a game here, actually, Nakamura versus Carlsen, played in Zurich back in 2014, where Carlsen with the black pieces actually went on to win. It's actually one of those positions, again, where black will end up with a slightly better center because after like knight c6, bc6, and we play bishop d3, eventually black will play this pawn on d7 to d5, and he'll end up with two pawns in the middle of the board, and white will just kind of have to fight back, sort of using maybe just one extra tempo, which doesn't seem to be sufficient in the long run. Maybe a computer can hold it, but for a person, it's very difficult. Uh, so black is at least equal here. But that leaves open this interesting possibility. Since d4 and bishop to b5 are the only two logical moves, if we made it black's move here, um, wouldn't he have the same options? So this is a very interesting idea, taking advantage of move orders. You could play this move a3. And this is one of the things when I talk about move orders, and I've talked about it in some of my other move order videos, but I'm going to definitely talk about it in this video as well because it's really important. Is when you're looking at the order that you move your pieces out, there are two questions that you have to ask. Is have I gained a tempo or lost a tempo? So the tempo count. That's question number one. Am I up or down a tempo? And the second question you have to ask, and this is the harder question, is does that tempo matter? Is it a positive tempo or a negative tempo? So with the move a3 here, we are clearly throwing the tempo in black's court. We're saying, hey, black. You can play either d5 or you can develop this bishop. But as previously noted, he's not going to be able to develop his bishop to b4. So that means he's going to have to develop it to some inferior square. He's going to have to develop it to either bishop e7 or he's going to have to develop it to c5. Now, if he develops it to e7, we can play d4, and after cd4, knight d4, there is no bishop b4 because a3 effectively prevented it. And therefore, this should be slight edge white. White has the better center now. White has this pawn on e4. We're not having to worry about this c6 and d5, and our e pawn is not going to disappear. If he still wants to develop this bishop, if he says, hey, I'm up a tempo, I'm going to have 3 pieces out and you're only going to have 2, the fork trick does work in reverse. If bishop c5, we can play the fork trick in reverse. And as a matter of fact, with the pawn on a3, the reverse fork trick actually works better than the original fork trick, because after knight takes e5, d4, bishop d6, we don't have to immediately capture. We can play pawn to f4. Against the other fork trick, this idea of maybe bringing this bishop back to b4 might have been a possibility. Here it is not. And that means that f4 actually works amazingly well. After f4 and then either knight g6 or even potentially, knight g6 e5 or knight c6 e5, white apparently has some sort of advantage here, somewhere between slight to major, according to the endgame, basically in all lines. So bishop c5 isn't all that great. And even d5 here, after e captures d5, knight captures d5, bishop b5, now white is going to have the position that black could have had. And the question is, okay, so the colors are reversed. What tempo is different? The only tempo that is different is this pawn is on a3. And that actually, it definitely shouldn't hurt us. It'll probably help us down the road as white, because eventually we're going to play d4, they're going to exchange, we're going to take back, and then it'll actually be useful that we have a pawn on a3 preventing anything from coming to b4, because of course this c pawn is going to transfer from the c3 to the d4 square, and it won't be holding that b4 square anymore. So in this position, it seems redundant that there's 2 pawns controlling b4, but down the road, 2 or 3 moves down the road, this could actually be a fairly useful thing. And as a matter of fact, white is probably very, very, very slightly better here. I think this is very slight edge white. So a3 is an interesting way to approach the tempo battle here. You can play a3, and it's a very interesting way to approach the move order of the 4 knights. Another thing to keep in mind is when you're playing the 4 knights, the order that you move your knights out in might actually matter as well. Of course, black can choose to play the 3 knights variation, for example, like knight f3, knight c6, knight c3, and he doesn't necessarily have to bring this knight to f6. He could play g6, or he could play some other move order, and of course that position is going to be very different as well. So when you're playing the 4 knights, it's very important to keep in mind the move orders in the position, because if you develop your bishop to c5 when the fork trick is possible, you can use that fork trick against your opponent. And of course, you can sort of, reverse that fork trick. If you want to develop your bishop, you need to bring your bishop out before you bring out your other knight so you can back it up with the pawn. And just keeping track of these minute details in the move order when you're trying to play the 4 knights with white or when you're trying to defend against the 4 whites with black is very, very important. Anyways, I hope you learned something new about chess. I hope you can use some of these ideas in your own games. Thank you very much for watching.